Hi, my name is James McNabb. I'm the General Manager at Travel and Auto at Strategic Content Labs. So today I thought I'd talk about the adoption curve as it applies to custom content. And I think this is going to give us a bit of a window into where things are going and how we can generate competitive advantage today. For those of you who are not familiar, the adoption curve, the technology adoption curve specifically, has been around for a long time. And in fact, it was in the 90s with kind of the rise of the internet and a lot of kind of back-end technology that a gentleman named Geoffrey Moore wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm that created kind of a central work that defined how that would play out. And this is the adoption curve here with that kind of chasm indicated. And what happens with technology is let me draw this for you. What happens with technology is you have your standard bell curve, and it has your usual cutoffs here. And the actual distribution isn't so critical, especially to this conversation, but essentially what happens is you have a new piece of technology, it starts here, and these are called early adopters. My handwriting has always been terrible, it's not going to change today. Then you have what we call the early mainstream, late mainstream, and laggards. When we had the internet, and the internet was new, we had people over here like my dad, who was into 1200 baud modems and early computers, trying to figure out how that worked in the early stages in the early 90s before it was really everybody's internet. At some point, we got a lot of dial-up and that kind of service, and we had the Netscape and the web opened up, and we had more people kind of getting into it. And then at some point, it crossed a critical mark, which is the chasm, where all of a sudden the technology doesn't require so much fiddling. All of a sudden, it just kind of works for people, and you can use it for what it's for, and it's no longer kind of a techie thing. And that's where we saw the growth, and I would say the introduction of broadband is kind of at the peak. And I would say now we are in the late majority. Most people are using the internet, and there's very few people, and they're probably our grandparents, that are over here in what they're called laggards, and they don't really want to get involved or don't know how it works, or they don't feel like they want to learn. And I think this is a very important thing. And the main reason is the thing that drives this isn't actually the technology. And in fact, what it really is a psychological profile of how people start to learn to use new things. So it's a little bit more like this comic here, which shows, you've got people being excited about it at the early stages, and then you've got kind of this chasm where it has to kind of become a mainstream thing and start to work well enough. And that's when everybody sees, oh, this is neat and cool, and it actually works, I want to try it, as opposed to, say, at the early stages of something's introduction into the marketplace, it maybe is a little hard to use or a little novel and a little difficult, and people have to get their head around it. Once you kind of get over that hump, it becomes more of a mainstream thing, and it continues to grow. And then you have this, the comment here. This is probably a little bit dated, this comic, but it says, "I heard Ashton Kutcher has one." Basically, what we're saying is that all of a sudden it's like becoming popularized, and everybody's got one. And then at some point, it's like, I found it at Sam's Club. It's kind of, I can't believe you don't have this too, becomes kind of the question. And then somewhere at the very back end, you have people who just aren't using it, and they probably never will. I want to talk about how this applies to custom content, which I don't think is that much of a stretch. So if we go back to our adoption curve, and we'll just mark it out here. When Totem was founded, I'll put the chasm in here. When Totem was founded back in 1998 as Redwood Communications, that was somewhere along this point, early adoption. I'm going to put 1998. For custom content. And this is when businesses realized that they could create a print publication that was kind of like a newsstand publication, which, by the way, newsstand was probably somewhere over here. So the consumer culture on magazines was very well established. It was in the late majority. Everything's good. Everybody's got them. And businesses started to say, hey, I wonder if we produced a magazine for our customers, or that would help us retain customers or get a competitive advantage or differentiate us from our competitors. And that's when Redwood really emerged. And there was a tremendous volume of people going into doing custom print publications. And there were a lot of businesses that got into that space, and we're one of the few that made it through the consolidation phase after the chaos of an early adoption of a new thing happens. So what we saw is a huge proliferation of new publications happening. And I think right now, the custom content space is in the late majority. The people for whom it provides a genuine advantage, they do it. That could be an in-flight magazine. That could be something like CAA magazine, which we produce. That could be some of the automotive magazines, and it could be some of the B2B publications. Places where print custom content makes a genuine, fundamental difference. And what's important to note here is when custom content was new over here, the newsstand business was over here. And now I'd even argue in some cases the newsstand business is continuing to trail, and custom content is probably today it's probably around here, and it's heading down this way. So the people using it are the people for whom it is still providing competitive advantage. And everybody else who's tried it, it made a difference or didn't, and they figured that out. And that's kind of where the custom content in print business, I think, is today. Now, so what does that mean? What happens next? Well, what are the new forms of content that are coming around? What's happening? Well, we've had the internet, and we can talk about YouTube. We'll do another curve here, and we'll call this one the YouTube curve. All of this over here, this was the early adopters. Wow, we can stick a video on the internet and other people can see it. That's great. Somewhere over here, we jumped from people being excited about the fact what the technology could do to actually using it for something. I would call this the cat video stage. This is where every cat video showed up and silly things and funny things. It was all fairly low resolution video, and it was mostly comical in nature. As that emerged, we start to see things like, and I would say the YouTube at its peak was probably, and it's continuing to evolve, so I'm not suggesting that it's going to go into its kind of end state or sunset state anytime soon, but I would say when we had Casey Neistat getting 1 million views of video every single day, that was kind of like a moment in time where vlogging had peaked and kind of become a real thing. But here's the important thing. That's for consumers. So influencers, vloggers, people doing video promotions, people doing unboxings, all of that kind of content that was extremely popular and still continues to have a lot of purchase in the market. All of that stuff was very, very big and continues to be very big in the consumer sphere. And I would say that we're now somewhere around here. We're in the late majority where I think there's a tremendous saturation of the market, and we've seen a lot of creators kind of come into that space and do very well and then kind of settle down after time. So this is interesting. So we've got a state where content is on print is certainly at the late majority, and content in video, well, it hasn't really happened for commercial purposes yet. It hasn't really been taken full advantage of by marketing organizations. There's a lot of polish. There's a lot of companies doing, I would say, one-off videos, not a lot of personality-driven serials that help establish a brand in the marketplace. But if we have a situation similar to custom content where we think today the consumer space is over here, maybe we're at a stage where we can start to think about these things from a video standpoint as getting into the early majority. And that brings us to the real point here, which is if the business for print content that helps differentiate a brand in the market is in its late stages, what's in its early stages? And I would say based on kind of this high level analysis, we really need to be looking at video as carrying a lot of the messaging. And why is this being held up? What's this chasm? And I think this is really where we are for commercial video. Well, organizations don't know how to do this. And this is just like if I was 20 years ago, I would say organizations just didn't know how to do the internet. Well, we got kind of the same problem. We've got brand managers and marketing managers that want to control the experience, control the messaging, be very measured in what gets released. They want to have a nice polish of everything that goes out. None of this like close-up angle business. They want everything kind of longer shot, clean, tidy. And unfortunately, that's really not how video feels today. Most video is shot like this today. And although we're not doing that, that's certainly what's driving a lot of the perspective and what keeps it engaging. It's very real and it's very up close. So how do we do this? Well, we have to help organizations kind of get past this chasm. And I think this is going to be kind of one of my core goals and one of our goals as an organization is to help organizations kind of get over that hump and figure out how they can do something that's very authentic and real and close. That is really driven by the organization and personalities inside the organization, as opposed to working with an outside influencer or an outside creator. And that's one of the real tricks, because then they're actually going to own their audience. if they can produce something that's captivating enough, interesting enough, and is real enough, and is high frequency enough, these are the real challenges. If that sort of formula can be produced on behalf of a business, then they're going to be onto something very powerful. And that takes a couple of things. It takes some acceptance of what the medium actually is like today versus what we grew up with it being like on like videos on TV or movies, and that's not at all what social video is about. And it also takes, I think, a fair bit of trust in some businesses to kind of get in and kind of give it a shot. If we see that consumers are on YouTube over here in the late majority, that means that we might be in the process of crossing the chasm for business. If we can get businesses into this space, it is a territory where they can create competitive differentiation, engage their audiences, and remember, the thing about the adoption curve, the technology adoption curve, it's not a problem with technology. It's not specific to technology. It's specific to psychology. How people think and feel and act and organize around the activities they want to do, and what holds them back and what moves them forward. And we're one of the organizations that wants to help businesses move forward and take best advantage of this media. So if this is something that's interesting to you, give us a call. We'd love to help you out. Otherwise, I will be back after a 2-week vacation to talk about content. Look forward to talking to you then. And in the meantime, have a great summer.